Now, but Chacham tell us that not only is grinding prohibited, not only if it's exactly similar, doesn't have to be exactly like what was done in the Mishkan. Anything that's similar, has the same idea, the same, in other words, as long as it's similar, even though it's not exactly like what was done in the Mishkan, but if it's the same idea, then it's equally prohibited. So in the Mishkan, it was actually grinding. They would grind it to a powder. But even if you're not grinding to powder, but you're dicing it up into very small pieces, it's the same idea. And that's also called grinding. So if you're making a vegetable salad and you're cutting it up into very thin pieces, like people usually do, thin slices, try to make it very thin, even though you don't call it grinding, no one called it, I'm grinding vegetables now. No one says that. But that is the malacha of grinding, because being that it's a similar idea, even though it's not exactly like was done in the Mishkan, but it's the same idea. Takes one item and cutting it up into small pieces, whether it's grinding into powder or cutting it into tiny little pieces. However, if you cut it into larger pieces, that's not grinding. So the malacha of cutting up vegetables very thin is if you're cutting up thin, not if you're making it large. Now, obviously, there's no exact definition for it, but you know when you're grinding thin, and you know when you're not grinding thin. And if you're not sure, so make sure to make it a little larger. In other words, there's always going to be a point where, is this thin? Yeah, there's going to be a point in the middle where it's going to be questionable. So you stay away from that. In other words, you make sure that when you're cutting up a vegetable salad, you're not cutting it up thin, you're cutting it up a little larger. Okay? Now, being that it's similar to the Mishkan, in the Mishkan it was but things that grow from the ground. So therefore, it only applies to fruits and vegetables that grow from the ground, generally speaking. We're soon going to learn an exception. But to start with, the malacha of grinding applies to fruits and vegetables that come from the ground. Things that don't come from the ground, there's no malacha of grinding. So if you want to cut up fish or meat into thin slices, there's no issue. It doesn't come from the ground. It's only by fruits and vegetables. Now, another thing. Things that don't come from the ground, we just said that there's no malacha of grinding. So you could cut up, no problem. Anything that's meat, chicken, fish, no problem. You just cut up very thin, right? But there's an exception to that rule, and that is if that by grinding you are accomplishing something, you're making it fit to be eaten. To actually, because essentially the malacha of grinding is supposed to accomplish something. So in the Mishkan, there was a purpose. They would take the herb and they would grind it. They needed for it to become a powder so they can make a paste out of it. However, being that in the Mishkan it was by things that come from the ground, so Chacham said anything similar, even though you're not really changing anything with the food, it's still prohibited. But when it comes to other things that don't come from the ground, we say, well, to start with, there's no malacha of grinding, because in the Mishkan it was only by things that come from the ground. And they come from the ground. Okay, so you could, the fish and meat, you could just cut very thin. But the Chacham also said, but if by grinding it, in other words, cutting thin, using the term grinding, if cutting thin, you're going to accomplish something with the food, you're going to make it edible, sort of explain, then it is grinding, because if you're accomplishing something with the cutting very thin, then even though it doesn't come from the ground, it's grinding, because now that's what essentially the idea of grinding is to accomplish something. Like a simple example, when you grind meat, you want by making it flour, now it's usable for what you need it for. So the example is like this. Let's say you have hard meat and you want to feed it You have animals, you have dogs, you want to feed it to them. But it's so hard that they're not going to be able to chew it. Oh, you cut it up, small pieces, thin pieces, they'll be able to chew it. Now, by you cutting it up into thin pieces, you're accomplishing something. So now you can't cut it up into pieces, because by you cutting it up into smaller pieces, now they'll be able to chew it. So now it's going to be considered grinding. So you can't do that. Another thing, if it was already ground, you could grind it again. Just like, are you allowed to cook something that was cooked already? There's no cooking with something that's cooked. It's already cooked. You're going to take a dry potato that's completely cooked and throw it into the pot of soup. It was cold till now. Now it's cooked, right? You're heating it up. You're not cooking it. It's already edible. Something that's cooked, there's no prohibition to cook it again. Something that's ground, there's no prohibition to grind it again. So what's an example of when it's already ground, are you allowed to grind it again? Anyone knows an example? An example would be, what would be an example? Yeah?
The salt and pepper sugar that haven't
White was already ground.
well, yeah.
The salt is already ground before, and then it gets.
Oh.
They are ground before, those salt and pepper shakers that you turn and you grind. They're already ground before, and then it's clumped together. Really?
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay, sometimes. If that I was not aware. If that's the case, then there's no issue. I understood that it was not ground before.
All in bigger pieces, they ground them to make them fit little.
They grind them, and then you grind them again.
Yeah.
If it's ground, why do you have to grind it again?
Make them smaller. No, they grind it into like medium-sized pieces.
No. That's not what I meant. Okay, I'm glad you brought up because that's not what I meant. I'm talking about something that was totally ground and then clumped together. The example for that is challah, cookies, cake.
This flour
It's already ground. You're right. In other words, your terminology is correct. The salt was already ground. But now you're grinding it more. Now you're making it thinner, smaller. So it's still grinding. So even though it's technically ground, but now you're grinding it into smaller particles. So that's still grinding. So those salt and pepper shakers you can't use on Shabbos. Okay, clear so far? Now something else. Chachamim allowed us to grind in a shinui gadol. If it's a highly irregular way, they allowed us to do it. Now, generally, we know when it comes to Shabbos, Yom Tov, anything that you're not allowed to do, you also can't do with a shinui. So, according to the Torah, anything that's prohibited on Shabbos, if you do it in an unusual way, the Torah did not prohibit it. But Chacham did prohibit it. So you can't carry on Shabbos, put something on your head, even though according to the Torah it's not prohibited, but rabbinically you're not allowed, even if you do it in an unusual way, which is called a shinui. However, there are certain situations Chacham allow you to do things with a shinui in an unusual way. When it comes to muktzeh, could be other situations. But over here, Chachamim allowed you to do it if it's a highly irregular type of way to do it. In other words, it's not just a shinui, but it's like a major shinui. So, whereas other malachas, if you're not allowed to do it, even if you do it in an unusual way, you're not allowed to do it. But when it comes to grinding, they say if you do it with a shinui, called a shinui gadol, a highly irregular way, then they allow you to do it. What's considered a highly irregular way when it comes to grinding? Say like this. Usually people, when they grind, they have a specialized utensil for grinding. So now, if you're not using a special utensil for grinding, but instead using a knife or a fork, but now you're not even using the knife, not even using the fork. You're using the back of the knife, the back of the fork. So that's called a highly irregular way. and you're allowed to grind that way on Shabbos, even though you're actually going to cut into tiny pieces. But because it's a shinui gadol, it's a shinui gadol. You don't find this for other malachas. Shinui gadol, it's a big shinui. It's really unusual. Really not. It's totally away from how it's usually done. So now you could take the back of a knife, back of a fork, and grind. And it's not going to necessarily work great, but you're allowed to do it because it's considered a highly unusual way. There is a machlokes when it comes to mashing, crushing, in a way where it's not turning into particles. Or let's say mashed potatoes, mashed bananas, mashed avocados. If you mash an avocado, is that called grinding? The difference of opinion. It's called grinding. Why should it not be called grinding? Anyone has any idea why I mash avocado? Why should it not be called grinding? There's any clue?
The way it's supposed to begin with, it was hard.
You have a good point, but that would apply more to something that was by boiled, it's brought down such a thing. Something that's boiled already. And those that say it's not considered, but I'm not referring to that. So like there is such an, we'll get to that. The idea that you're mentioning will apply to something that's cooked. There's a leniency over there. Anyone has any idea? The logic is that usually when you grind something, it's becoming pieces. When you mash avocado, it's not becoming pieces. There was one clump till now, and it's one clump now. Before it was held together, now it's mashed completely, but it didn't turn into pieces, into particles. Still like one piece, one mush. So in our opinion, it'd say it's not called grinding. And you're allowed to do it in Shabbos, but we should be strict. There are stricter opinions, and we are careful not to mash avocados and bananas in Shabbos. Now,
But if you do it on the food,
doing it on the food, what do you mean?
you want an avocado, so you put it on the food, they're not allowed? It's not.
Good question. We're not allowed to, if we're careful not to mash avocados, to mush it because it's grinding. What about taking avocado and smearing it on the food? Why is that not called grinding? Good question. Never thought of this. Why would that? Obviously, we're allowed to take it. There's no issue with that because grinding is when you take the whole avocado and you mush it. Here you're scratching off what you want, and you're smearing it on. It's not an issue. The question is, what's the logic? There must be a reason for it because that's definitely permitted. Yeah, you could do that. You're allowed to take avocado. That's not called grinding. Good question. Why would that? Think about it. Why is, I just would bring another point when you mentioned before that, let's say mashing a potato that was boiled already. There are opinions that are lenient for that, and they say you're allowed to do it because being that you boiled it, so it became softer. So now it's so soft that it's already done. It's easy to mush. So there are opinions that are lenient with that, but we are careful also with cooked potatoes that we don't that we should not mash it. So there are lenient opinions, something that's cooked already, because the cooking already softened it, and it's just so easy to mash. There are lenient opinions, but we are machmir, we are strict. Now, but we said already you're allowed to do with hashinu. So really, on a practical level, it's not a big deal because you could take the back of a knife, back of a fork, and just take the avocado, take the potato, and mash it. And so when it comes to cutting into pieces, it's not practical. Take the back of a fork, back of a knife, and start cutting vegetables. Making vegetables a small piece not going to work. But something that's mushy, like an avocado, you take the back of a knife, it works very well. You just mush it down. And there's no problem. You're allowed to do it. Now, there is a very interesting opinion that comes along and says, we had before about separating, that you're allowed to separate the good from the bad. Why? Why let us say good from the bad? Instead of, it's the way of eating. Because the way of eating, not a malacha, that's how you eat, take good from bad, right? There is an opinion that says the same as regards to grinding over here. Now, Rebbe questions this. Rebbe does not encourage us to use this opinion. Rebbe says we should be careful and not go by this opinion. Okay, what exactly is this opinion? Anyone gets the idea what it is? Yeah. So what is this opinion? They don't pick up what I'm saying, what this opinion says. I'm saying it's just like separating. You're allowed to take good from bad because you're going to now. The opinion that says that you can dice the vegetables out very thin, you're about to eat. Because it's not called grinding, it's the way of eating. Now, Rebbe does not like this. It's not right. He doesn't like it. He doesn't agree with this opinion. He says that there are those who question, that many question this opinion. Now, Rebbe says we should not go by this opinion. But if someone who does go by the opinion, we cannot say they're desecrating Shabbos, they're totally off, because there is such an opinion. But Al Rebbe is not comfortable with this opinion. That's a better word. He's not comfortable with this opinion. However, there is an advantage making the vegetable salad close right when you come back from shul, not only for the reason of separating. Now, we said when you make the vegetable salad, you can't do it before you go to shul. You have to go and come back to shul because you're separating. You're doing better. You want to come back from shul, right? Discussed about the vegetable salad in terms of separating. You want to come back from shul. But there's actually another reason why you should come back from shul, because of this. Because in case you make it too thin, so if you do it when you come back from shul, there are opinions that say it's okay, you're allowed to make it thin. So what you're gaining by doing it when you come back from shul, even if we wouldn't be involved with separating, but in case you end up making it too thin, there are opinions that say that you could make it very thin if it's close to the time of eating. That's another advantage when you're doing it when you come back from shul. Even in cases, let's say if you're not doing separating, let's say there's no separating involved, right? But when you do it close to the meal, and you're careful not to make it thin, make it a little thicker. But there are opinions that say that even if you make it thin, it's also good. So in case you end up, someone's not so careful, let's say, and ends up making it too thin, but if you do it close to the time of the meal, there are opinions that say it's okay. So that's another advantage when people are cutting up vegetables close to the time of the meal. But in any case, we're not going by this lenient opinion. We don't go by that. Rebbe says, don't rely on this opinion. Rebbe says, make sure it's thicker. Rebbe is saying, there's another point. Rebbe is saying to those people who, let's say, are using this opinion, so that's another thing. People, let's say, they are relying on that opinion. So Rebbe says very clear, but at least make sure to do it when you come back from shul. Okay. Now, this leniency, even though we don't go by this leniency, but those who, let's say, are being lenient, it doesn't apply to, let's say, spices, because it's only by things that you eat. What's the idea why you're allowed to do it? Because it's way of eating. You cut it up and then you eat it. But spices is not something that you necessarily do right before the meal. People could grind spices in advance. So this leniency, those who let's say using this leniency, it won't apply to grinding spices. Okay. Do you have any questions before we go further to the next topic? I think this is clear, right? So we're going to go to the next malacha of lush. Lush is the malacha of kneading. lush. So we just discussed the malacha of leichin, grinding. Now we go to the malacha of lush. This malacha, lush is the opposite of teichin. We have leichin. Now we have lush, kneading. You grind the herbs. Now you take the herbs and you bring it back together with water, make a paste out of it. So that's lush. They would knead it. They would take the the ground herbs, make a paste, and they would boil it. So in the Malach of Lush, there's two parts to the Malach of Lush. And there's actually an argument, what is the prohibition of Lush? It sounds like, oh, Lush means kneading it. Bring it together, mixing the powder with the liquid. That's the Malacha. There's two parts to it. One part is just combining the ingredients together. And the next part is mixing it. Like when you make a dough, what do? First you combine the ingredients, then you mix it. But there's two opinions. What is the prohibition? One opinion says the prohibition is just the fact that you combine the ingredients together. You put it together, the flour, let's take a dough, flour and water, then itself is the prohibition. That's it. That's prohibited by the Torah. That's it. That's what the Torah prohibits. The other opinion says no, that the malach is when you mix it together. So therefore you have to be careful with both parts are considered the malach of lush. You can't do any of them. Now, having said that, this will also apply when we want to do it with a shini. Because just like when it comes to toichin, grinding, we said you could do it with a very big shini in an unusual way. When it comes to grinding, to kneading, Chacham also allowed us to do with a shini, but not what we discussed before. Before we discussed a shini god, a highly unusual way. Over here, they're allowing us a shini because when it's only prohibited rabbinically, they're going to allow us to do it with a shini. Now, is kneading prohibited by the Torah or is it prohibited rabbinically? It's prohibited by the Torah, right? So the way we discussed it, you cannot do it with a shina because it's prohibited by the Torah. But if it's only prohibited rabbinically, then you could use the shina. What do I mean by that? There is a way how to do kneading when it's only prohibited rabbinically. It's still prohibited, but it's prohibited rabbinically. So if you're going to do kneading in a way where it's only prohibited rabbinically, then you're going to be allowed to do it with a shina, because when it's only rabbinically prohibited, the same sages who prohibited say we're going to allow you to do it with the shina. When is it prohibited rabbinically? Anyone familiar with lush at all? With kneading? So generally, when we spoke about lush kneading, we're talking about we think about like a dough. You're kneading into a dough where it becomes thick. But sometimes people let's say, make a pancake batter, right? Pancake batter, that's also kneading, right? You're blending powder, whatever, with liquid, and it's becoming one. It's connecting together. That's also kneading, right? But it's a loose batter. It's not a thick batter. Or let's say even a cake batter is a little thicker. Any batter that you could spill. So it's a batter that you can go like this. You go like this, and it's going to become a regular dough. You go like this, it's not coming out. But let's say a batter that's a cake batter. I know it's called a cake batter, but for a cake, or batter for a cake, or for sure make pancakes. You can spill it out. It moves. So that type of mixture is only prohibited rabbinically. Because it's only prohibited rabbinically, the Chachamim allowed us to do it with a shina, not in a regular way. Which is, so what is that shina? So you need two shinui, you need two steps over here. Because we just said there's two parts of the malacha. There's the part of, one opinion says the prohibition is combining the ingredients. One opinion says the prohibition is mixing the ingredients. So there's two parts to the malacha. So in both parts, when you combine the ingredients, do it with a shina. When you mix it, do it with a shina. Do it a different way. So you combine it, do it a shini, combine it in a different way. Instead of, let's say, putting in the powder and then the liquid, put the liquid and then the powder. And then when you mix it, the same thing. Don't mix it in a regular way. Mix it in a different way. Find a different way how to do it, yeah?
Would this apply to like, you know, when you have the yogurt and there's like liquid on the top and then there's like the regular yogurt on the bottom and you need to mix it, like the separated
Let me finish this, then we'll get to other things, okay? So you have to do it, when you combine it, you do it differently, which means if you usually put the powder and then the liquid or whatever, this applies to, let's say, in baby cereal for kids. That's where it applies. We make baby cereal, right? That's a practical example of this in Shabbos. Usually put in the baby powder, and then the baby cereal, and then you put the liquid, reverse, put the liquid, and then you put the powder inside, reverse it. And then when you mix it, don't mix it in the regular way. What do you mean don't mix it in the regular way? How do you do it differently? So you can take the back of a spoon and mix it with the back of a spoon, the back of a knife, or you can shake it around. That's how you do it. But it's only going to be allowed if it's a loose batter. If it's not a thick batter, if it's just as thick like a dough, you make like a very thick cereal, you can't do that in Shabbos. It's not going to help even if you do it in an unusual way. It has to be loose in a way that you can move it around. Yeah, what's the example you wanted to bring?
Oh, I was just asking, because I remember reading there's an issue like with yogurt when it separates and you need to mix in like the separate.
The yogurt separates by
like as in like it has like a liquid on top of it and you open up the yogurt and it's like the
right.
liquid.
So anytime you open up a jar that has, sometimes you have with hummus or tahini, different things. I think you open up and the oil floats to the top. It was already mixed. So if it's already mixed, there's no kneading over there because it was already mixed. You're just mixing it back to the way it was. There's no issue with that. Another example of kneading is pouring milk into mashed potatoes. It's also considered kneading. Another example is egg salad. Making egg salad on Shabbos is a problem. Yom Tov, it's okay because you're allowed to do kneading on Yom Tov. So whatever we're discussing now, the malach of kneading, not grinding. Grinding is a little different, depends what. But kneading is totally okay on Yom Tov. So you want to make egg salad. So you're mashing the eggs and you mix it with mayonnaise. That's kneading. That's mamish kneading. You're not tired when you blending it. It's coming together. There's no way to do that on Shabbos. There is a way, actually. If you don't cut the egg into tiny pieces, just make slices of eggs or large pieces, and then you mix it with the mayonnaise. And that's not how people do it. But then it's not kneading because if the pieces are noticeable, then it's not considered kneading. It's not becoming one. There's no problem. Now, a question in regards to going back to grinding for a moment. There's a question. Are you allowed to use an egg slicer on Shabbos? Egg slicer that slices the eggs? Is that called grinding? Huh? Egg slicer. Answer is yes, you could. It's not called grinding. Now, generally using a specialized utensil is not allowed at all. In other words, even though there's a leniency that some say you're allowed to do close to the time of eating, but if it's a specialized utensil, special for grinding, there's no way you're allowed to use it in Shabbos. But when it comes to an egg slicer, that's not called a utensil that's specialized for grinding. That's like a professional knife. Like if you would slice it and you cut up an egg into slices and use a knife, let's say, it's not called grinding. Making slices. Now you have a special utensil that instead of using a knife, using a professional thing that cuts all the pieces at once. That's not called that it's specialized for grinding. That's why X slicer is not a problem. Use that on Shabbos. Going back to kneading. So here's other examples of kneading. You want to mix, let's say, radishes that's sliced very thin. Okay, we're not discussing grinding. It was already sliced before Shabbos, let's say, very thin. Now you want to mix that with vinegar. Is this considered kneading? In other words, mixing it with vinegar, is this called kneading? No, because it's not becoming one, correct? It's not really kneading. However, because you are mixing it together, it's brought down that when you do it, don't do it vigorously. Because it's sort of like a minor form of kneading, even though it's not really kneading, it's not blending together. But because you sort of want it to come together in a certain way. So even though you're allowed to do it, you can do it. But don't do it like vigorous. Don't do it like really strong, because that's sort of like this pushes it together stronger. So don't do it vigorously. So you're doing it a little different. You just regular, just mix it like this, but not vigorously means you do it really fast. You shouldn't do that. Yeah.
So wash is when like two substances become one substance, basically.
Again,
Wash is when
right.
two substances
The idea of
become-
wash is to bring things to come one thing, right?
So it's making coffee on the basis.
No, because it's a liquid. When it's totally liquefied, it has to have some density, something there. It's just if it's pure liquid, it doesn't apply. So let's say banana, mashing banana, and mixing it with lemon juice or whatever, so goes together. It says it shouldn't be done. So you do it the shini. So all these things is on a practical level, you have an easy way out of it. You get past the issue because we're saying you can mix in an unusual way. So take the back of the knife, back of the fork, and just mix it together. And it works. It does the job, just takes a little longer, but you get the job done. Have any questions?
So I wanted to ask, you said that when you're using scenery for like the batter, you should do scenery for the combining part and for the mixture, like
Right.
actually mixing. So for the combining part, you do it in a different order than you usually do it, like that's what you mean?
Right.
Or-
Whatever you usually do first, you usually put the powder first, and put the liquid in the powder. Just reverse the order. There's other ways that we talk about it. The most practical way of doing it in an unusual way when you mix it is to use the back of a fork. But there's other ways too. It's just not so practical. So I said it's brought down. You can take, let's say, you go like this. There's another way also. You can take a knife, whatever, doesn't matter any way you do it, and go like this. You go up and down, crisscross. Like, you go like this and like that, like this and like that. Get it? You go this way and that way. And if you continue doing it for a long time, eventually it's going to mix. That's another way how to do it, if you want to do it that way. But practically, you take the back of a fork and go faster. But this is another way how to do it. You have sometime, now what about, let's say you want to mix ketchup with mayonnaise together. People do that sometimes, they mix it together. Is that called kneading?
No.
It's not called kneading, it's the same consistency. Ketchup and mayonnaise is the same idea. So mixing it together is not kneading. Kneading is when you take different solid, liquid, powder, and liquid, something different, and they blend together. But if it's the same consistency, it's not called kneading. There's no issue with that.
But you're creating something.
you're creating something new, but there's no prohibition to create something new. You mean like you don't crush ice because it looks like you're creating something new? There's certain things Chacham prohibited. Crushing ice is like they said it's like you're creating something new. They didn't prohibit every single thing. It's not. It's really not. There's really nothing new about it. It's just something different. In other words, when you make a vegetable salad, it's also something new. Also, right? Till now it was a pepper. There's a tomato, cucumber. Now it became. You also changed it. It's the same idea, really. The questions? Okay. Stop here. Yeah.